Stories of Futures Past presents 6 stories featuring Alien Visitations, Volume 2. Reluctant Genius by Henry Slesar. Doorstep by Keith Laumer. Rough Beast by Roger D. Vital Ingredient by Charles V. DeVette. Classified Object by John Victor Peterson. Brknk's Bounty by Jerry Sohl. Reluctant Genius by Henry Slesar, writing as O.H. Leslie. Originally published in Amazing Stories, January 1957. Narrated by Tom Trussel. It is said that life crawled up from the slime of the sea bottoms and became man because of inherent greatness bred into him before the dawn of time. But perhaps this urge was not as formless as we think. Buos was chastising Laloi as they sped through the ionosphere of the green planet. But like the airy creature she was, Laloi ignored the criticism and rippled zephyr-like through a clump of daffodils when they completed their descent. "So pretty," she sighed. She flung her incorporeal substance around each flower, absorbing their unified beauty of scent, sight, and feel. Buos shrilled himself into a column of wind to express his displeasure at her attitude. "Stupid, silly, shallow thing," he said. "If the others only knew how you behaved." "And you'll be glad to tell them, of course," she said, extending her fingers of air into the roots of the wind-bent grass. She rolled across the hill ecstatically, and Buos followed in grumbling billows of energy. "I don't carry tales," he replied, somewhat mortified. "But we're here as observers, and you insist upon making this world a plaything." "I love it," she said happily. "It's so warm and green." Buos whipped in front of her angrily. "This is an assignment," he snapped, his emotion crackling the air about him. "We have a purpose here." "Purpose," she groaned, settling over a patch of crowded clover. "How many centuries will this assignment last?" "This world is young," said Buos. "It will take time." "But how long?" she asked mournfully. "Our world will be shriveled and dead before these people have the knowledge to rescue us. Why can't we spend our lives here?" "And leave the others behind?" said Buos stiffly. "Selfish being," he said sadly. "This world cannot support 1/4 our number." "Oh, I know," Laloi said. "I do not mean to say such things. I am twisted by my sorrow." As if to express her self-abnegation, she corkscrewed out of the clover and into a thin spiral of near-nothingness. "Settle down, foolish one," said Buos, not unkindly. "I know your feelings. Do you think I am not tormented as well by the slow pace of these earth things? Crude, barbaric beings like children with the building blocks of science. They have such a long way to go." "And so few know," said Laloi despairingly. "A handful of seeing minds, tens of millions of ignorant ones. Not even first principles. They're stupid, stupid." "But they will learn," Buos said stubbornly. "That is historical fact. Some day they will know the true meanings of matter and light and energy. Slowly, yes, slowly. But in terms of their growth it will seem like a great speed to them." "And in terms of our world," said Laloi, spinning sadly over the ground, "they may be far too late." "No!" In his excitement Buos forgot himself and entwined with the flowing form of the she-creature, and the result was a rending of the air that cracked like heat lightning over the field. "No," he repeated again, They must not be too late. They must learn. They must build from the very ground, and then they must fly. Then their eyes must be lifted to the stars, and desire must extend them to all the universe. It seems so hopeless. It cannot be. Our destiny is not extinction. They must come to us in fleets of silver and replant our soil and send towers of green shooting into our sky, breathing out air. Yes, yes, Leloy cried pitifully. It will be that way, Buos. It will be that way. That man-creature will begin with him. Buos floated earthward disconsolately. He is a dreamer, he said cheerlessly. His mind is good. He thinks of tomorrow. He is one of the knowing ones. But he cannot be moved, Leloy. His thoughts may fester and die in the prison of his brain. No, they will not. We have watched him. He understands much. He will help us. I have seen his like before, said Buos hopelessly. He thinks and he works, and his conclusions will die stillborn, for lack of a moving force. Then let us provide it, Buos. Let us move him. With what? Said the other disdainfully. Arms of nothing, hands of vacuum, a breeze against his cheek, a rustle in leaves, a meaningless whistle in his ear. Let us try, let us try. This empty watchfulness is destroying us. Let us move him, Buos, come. Faster than the sky-sweeping clouds they flew, over the gently swelling hills, over the yearning branches of the trees, over the calm blue waters of the lakes. Swifter than the flight of birds they came, searching for a thinking mind. They found him at last. He knows, said Leloy. Only now to say, this is so because, and this must happen when. Only to think, to understand. They hovered over his head in a pandemonium of helplessness. They whirled and tumbled and shrilly circled, and then to Leloy the inspiration came. The apple, caught by a sudden gust of wind, twisted from the tenuous hold of the tree and fell to the ground. The man, startled, picked it up. He gazed at it, deep in thought. The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. Doorstep by Keith Laumer. Originally published in Galaxy Magazine, February 1961. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Steadying his elbow on the kitchen table serving as desk, Brigadier General Straught levelled his binoculars and stared out through the second-floor window of the farmhouse at the bulky object lying canted at the edge of the wood lot. He watched the figures moving over and around the grey mass, then flipped the lever on the field telephone at his elbow. "How are your boys doing, Major?" "General, since that box hit this morning." "I know all about the box, Bill. So does Washington by now. What have you got that's new?" "Sir, I haven't got anything to report yet. I have 4 crews on it, and she still looks impervious as hell." "Still getting the sounds from inside?" "Intermittently, General." "I'm giving you 1 more hour, Major. I want that thing cracked." The General dropped the phone back on its cradle and peeled the cellophane from a cigar absently. He had moved fast, he reflected, after the state police notified him at 9:41 last night. He had his men on the spot, the area evacuated of civilians, and a preliminary report on its way to Washington by midnight. At 2:36 they had discovered the 4-inch cube lying on the ground 15 feet from the huge object, missile, capsule, bomb, whatever it was. But now, several hours later, nothing new. The field phone jangled. Straught grabbed it up. "General, we've discovered a thin spot up on the top side. All we can tell so far is that the wall thickness falls off there." "All right, keep after it, Bill." This was more like it. If Brigadier General Straught could have his thing wrapped up by the time Washington awoke to the fact that it was something big, well, he'd been waiting a long time for that second star. This was his chance, and he would damn well make most of it. He looked across the field at the thing. It was half in and half out of the woods, flat-sided, round-ended, featureless. Maybe he should go over and give it a closer look personally. He might spot something the others were missing. It might blow them all to kingdom come any second. But what the hell, he had earned his star on sheer guts in Normandy. He still had 'em. He keyed the phone. "I'm coming down, Bill," he told the Major. On impulse he strapped a pistol belt on. Not much use against a house-sized bomb, but the heft of it felt good. The thing looked bigger than ever as the jeep approached it, bumping across the muck of the freshly ploughed field. From here he could see a faint line running around, just below the juncture of side and top. Major Greer hadn't mentioned that. The line was quite obvious. In fact, it was more of a crack. With a sound like a baseball smacking the catcher's glove, the crack opened. The upper half tilted, men sliding. Then impossibly it stood open, vibrating. Like the roof of a house suddenly lifted. The driver gunned the jeep. There were cries and a ragged shrilling that set Straught's teeth on edge. The men were running back now, 2 of them dragging a third. Major Greer emerged from behind the object, looked about, ran toward General Strout, shouting, "Man dead! It snapped! We weren't expecting it!" Strout jumped out beside the men, who had stopped now and were looking back. The underside of the gaping lid was an iridescent black. The shrill noise sounded thinly across the field. Greer arrived, panting. "What happened?" Strout snapped. "I was checking over that thin spot, General. The first thing I knew it was coming up under me. I fell. Tate was at the other side. He held on it and it snapped him loose against a tree. His skull." "What the devil's that racket?" "That's the sound we were getting from inside before, General. There's something in there, alive." "All right, pull yourself together, Major. We're not unprepared. Bring our half-tracks into position. The tanks will be here soon." Strout glanced at the men standing about. He would show them what leadership meant. "You men keep back," he said. He puffed his cigar calmly as he walked toward the looming object. The noise stopped suddenly. That was a relief. There was a faint and curious odour in the air, something like chlorine, or seaweed, or iodine. There were no marks in the ground surrounding the thing. It had apparently dropped straight into its present position. It was heavy, too. The soft soil was displaced in a mound a foot high all along the side. Behind him, Strout heard a yell. He whirled. The men were pointing. The jeep started up, churned toward him, wheels spinning. He looked up. Over the edge of the grey wall, 6 feet above his head, a great reddish limb, like the claw of a crab, moved, groping. Strout yanked the .45 from its holster, jacked the action, and fired. Soft matter spattered, and the claw jerked back. The screeching started up again angrily, and was drowned in the engine roar as the jeep slid to a stop. Strout stooped, grabbed up a leaf to which a quivering lump adhered, jumped into the vehicle as it leapt forward, and a shock, and they were going into a spin, and— "Lucky it was soft ground," somebody said, and somebody else asked, "What about the driver?" Silence. Strout opened his eyes. "What about—" A stranger was looking down at him, an ordinary-looking fellow of about 35. "Easy now, General Strout. You've had a bad spill. Everything is all right. I'm Professor Lieberman from the university." "The driver," Strout said with an effort. "He was killed when the jeep went over." "Went over?" "The creature lashed out with a member resembling a scorpion stinger. It struck the jeep and flipped it. You were thrown clear. The driver jumped and the jeep rolled on him." Strout pushed himself up. "Where's Greer?" "I'm right here, sir." Major Greer stepped up, stood attentively. "Those tanks here yet?" "No, sir. I had a call from General Margrave. There's some sort of hold-up, something about not destroying scientific material. I did get the mortars over from the base." Straught got to his feet. The stranger took his arm. "You ought to lie down, General." "Who the hell is going to make me?" "Greer, get those mortars in place, spaced between your tracks." The telephone rang. Straught seized it. "General Straught." "General Margrave here, Straught. I'm glad you're back on your feet. There'll be some scientists from the State University coming over. Cooperate with them. You're going to have to hold things together at least until I can get another man in there to—" "Another man? General Margrave, I'm not incapacitated. The situation is under complete control." "It is it? I understand you've got still another casualty. What happened to your defensive capabilities?" "That was an accident, sir. The jeep—" "We'll review that matter at a later date. What I'm calling about is more important right now. The codemen have made some headway on that box of yours. It's putting out a sort of transmission." "What kind, sir?" "Half the message, it's only 20 seconds long, repeated, is in English. It's a fragment of a recording from a daytime radio program. One of the network men identified it. The rest is gibberish. They're still working over it." "What?" "Bryant tells me he thinks there may be some sort of correspondence between the two parts of the message. I wouldn't know myself. In my opinion, it's a threat of some sort." "I agree, General. An ultimatum." "Right. Keep your men back at a safe distance from now on. I want no more casualties." Straught cursed his luck as he hung up the phone. Margrave was ready to relieve him, after he had exercised every precaution. He had to do something fast before this opportunity for promotion slipped out of his hands. He looked at Major Greer. "I'm neutralizing this thing once and for all. There'll be no more men killed." Lieberman stood up. "General, I must protest any attack against this." Straught whirled. "I'm handling this, Professor. I don't know who let you in here or why, but I'll make the decisions. I'm stopping this man-killer before it comes out of its nest. Maybe it gets into that village beyond the woods. There are 4,000 civilians there. It's my job to protect them." He jerked his head at Greer, strode out of the room. Lieberman followed, pleading. "The creature has shown no signs of aggressiveness, General Straught." "With 2 men dead?" "You should have kept them back." "Oh, it was my fault, was it?" Straught stared at Lieberman with cold fury. This civilian pushed his way in here, then had the infernal gall to accuse him, Brigadier General Straught, of causing the death of his own men. If he had had the fellow in uniform for 5 minutes. "You're not well, General. That fall—" "Keep out of my way, Professor," Straught said. He turned and went on down the stairs. The present foul-up could ruin his career, and now this egghead interference. With Greer at his side, Straught moved out to the edge of the field. "All right, Major. Open up with your 50 calibers." Greer called a command, and a staccato rattle started up. The smell of cordite and the blue haze of gunsmoke. This was more like it. He was in command here. Lieberman came up to Straught. "General, I appeal to you in the name of science. Hold off a little longer, at least until we learn what the message is about." "Get back from the firing line, Professor." Straught turned his back on the civilian, raised their glasses to observe the effect of the recoilless rifle. There was a tremendous smack of displaced air, and a thunderous boom as the explosive shell struck. Straught saw the grey shape jump, the raised lid waver. Dust rose from about it. There was no other effect. "Keep firing, Greer," Straught snapped, almost with a feeling of triumph. The thing was impervious to artillery. Now who was going to say it was no threat? "How about the mortars, sir?" Greer said. "We can drop a few rounds right inside it." "All right, try that before the lid drops." And what'll we try next? I don't know, he thought. The mortar fired with a muffled thud. Straught watched tensely. 5 seconds later, the object erupted in a gout of pale pink debris. The lid rocked, pinkish fluid running down its opalescent surface. A second burst, and a third. A great fragment of the menacing claw hung from the branch of a tree 100 feet from the ship. Straught grabbed up the phone. "Cease fire!" Lieberman stared in horror at the carnage. The telephone rang. Straught picked it up. "General Straught," he said. His voice was firm. He had put an end to the threat. "Strott, we've broken the message," General Margrave said excitedly. "It's the damnedest thing I ever—" Strott wanted to interrupt, announce his victory, but Margrave was droning on. "Strange sort of reasoning, but there was a certain analogy. In any event, I am assured the translation is accurate. Here's how it reads in English." Strott listened. Then he carefully placed the receiver back on the hook. Lieberman stared at him. "What did it say?" Strott cleared his throat. He turned and looked at Lieberman for a long moment before answering. It said, "Please take good care of my little girl." The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. Rough Beast by Roger D. Aycock, writing as Roger D. Originally published in Analog, March 1962. Narrated by Tom Trussel. The field of the experimental telethink station in the Florida Keys caught the fleeing Maurid's attention just as its stolen Federation lifeboat plunged into the outer reaches of nightside atmosphere. The Maurid reacted with the instant decision of a harried wolf stumbling upon a dark cave that offers not only sanctuary, but a lost lamb for supper as well. With a pursuing Federation ship hot on its taloned heels, the Maurid zeroed on the telethink signals, fuzzy and incomprehensibly alien to its viciously direct mentality, but indicating life and therefore food, and aimed straight for their source. The lifeboat crashed headlong in the mangroves fringing Dutchman's Cay, perhaps 10 miles west of the Oversea Highway, and less than 2 from the telethink station. The Maurid emerged in snarling haste, anticipating the power plant's explosion by a matter of seconds, and vanished like a magenta-furred juggernaut into the moonlit riot of vegetation that crowded back from the mangrove strip of beach. The Maurid considered it a success. The lifeboat went up in a cataclysmic roar and flare of bluish light that brought Van, the telethink operator on duty, out of his Goldberg helmet with a prickly conviction of runaway range missiles. It all but blinded and deafened Ellis, his partner, who was cruising with a portable telethink in the station launch throughout a low-lying maze of islands a quarter of a mile from Dutchman's Cay. Their joint consternation was lost on the Maurid, because both at the moment were outside its avid reach. The teeming welter of life on Dutchman's Cay was not. The Maurid headed inland, sensing abundant quarry to satisfy the ravening hunger that drove it, and, that craving satisfied, to offer ample scope to its joy of killing. The Maurid's escape left Zaxtel, Federation ship's commander, in a dilemma bordering upon the insoluble. It would have been bad enough to lose so rare a specimen even on a barren world, but to have one so voracious at large upon one so teeming, as the primitive telethink signals demonstrated, with previously unsuspected intelligence, was unthinkable. This, at the outset, was Zaxtel's problem. Forbidden by strictest galactic injunction, he could not make planetfall and interfere with a previously unscouted primitive culture. Contrariwise, neither could civilized ethic condone his abandoning such an unsuspecting culture to the bloody mercies of a Maurid without every effort to correct his blunder. Hanging in stationary orbit in order to keep a fixed relation to the Maurid's landing site, the Federation commander debated earnestly with his staff until a sudden quickening of the barbarous telethink net made action imperative. 2 of the autochtons were isolated on a small island with the Maurid. Unwarned, They were doomed. So he grouped his staff about him, sitting, crouching, coiling or hovering as individual necessity demanded, and as one entity put the whole into rapport with the all but meaningless signals that funneled up from the telethink station in the Florida Keys, and, in doing so, roused a consternation as great as his own and infinitely more immediate. The flash brought Van away from the telethink console and out of the Quonset station to stare shakenly across the tangle of mangroved islands to the west. Wayman came out a moment later on the run when the teeth-jarring blast of the explosion woke him. They stood together on the moon-bright sand, and Van relayed in 4 words the total of his information. "It fell over there," Van said. A pale pinkish cloud of smoke and steam rose and drifted phosphorescently toward a non-committal moon. "Second K out," Wayman said. "That will be Dutchman's, where the hermit lives." Van nodded, drawing minimal reassurance from the fact that there had been no mushroom. "It shouldn't be atomic." The Gulf breeze was steady out of the west, freighted with its perpetual salt and mangrove smell. "The Geigers will tell us soon enough," Wayman said. "Not that it'll help us with Ellis out in the launch." They looked at each other in sudden shock of joint realization. "The launch," Van said. "Ellis is out there with a portable telethink rig. We were working out field strength ratios for personal equipment." They dived for the Quonset together. Van, smaller and more agile than the deliberate Wayman, reached the telethink first. "Nothing but the regular standby carrier from Washington," Van said. "Ellis may have been directly under the thing when it struck. He was working toward Dutchman's Cay, hoping for a glimpse of the hermit." "Maybe he wasn't wearing the telethink when the blast came," Wayman said. Then, with characteristic practicality, "Better image Washington about this while we're waiting for Ellis to report in. Can't use the net radio. We'd start a panic." Van settled himself at the console. "I'll try. That is, if I can get across anything beyond the sort of subliminal rot we've been trading lately." He signaled for contact and felt the Washington operator's answering surge of subconscious resentment at being disturbed. With the closing of the net, the now familiar giddiness of partial rapport came on him, together with the oppressive sense of bodily sharing. There was a sudden trickle of saliva in his mouth, and he resisted the desire to spit. "Washington is having a midnight snack," Van said. "Rotted sardines and Limburger, I think." He made correction when the Washington operator radiated indignation. "Goose liver and dill pickles, then, but you wouldn't guess it. Salt tastes like brass filings." Wayman said shortly, "Get on with it. You can clown later." Van visualized the flare of explosion and winced at the panicky hammer-and-sickled surmise that came back to him. "How would I know?" he said aloud. "We have a man out." He recalled the inherent limitation of phonetics then, and fell back upon imagery, picturing Ellis's launch heading toward an island luridly lighted by the blast. For effect, he added, on the Cay's minuscule beach, a totally imaginary shack of driftwood, complete with bearded hermit. He knew immediately when authority arrived at the other end of the net. There was a mental backwash of conversation that told him his orders, even before the Washington operator set himself for their relay. "They want an eyewitness account from Ellis," he told Wayman, as if... Ellis broke into the net at that moment, radiating a hazy image. He was still partially blinded from the glare of the blast. Over a lowering quay overhung by a dwindling pall of pinkish smoke, in the foreground of lagoon and mangroves stood a stilted shack not unlike the one Van had pictured, but without the hermit. Instead, The rickety elevation of thatched porch was a blot of sable darkness relieved only by a pair of slanted yellow eyes gleaming close to the floor. Climactically, Zaxtol entered the net then, with an impact of total information that was more than the human psyche, conditioned to serialized thinking by years of phonetic communication, could bear. The Washington operator screamed and tore off his helmet, requiring restraint until he could compose himself enough to relay his message. Ellis, in his launch, fainted dead away and ran the boat headlong aground on the beach of Dutchman's Cay. Van reeled in his chair, teetering between shock and lunacy, until Wayman caught him and slid the telethink from his head. It was minutes before Van could speak. When he did, it was with a macabre flippancy that Wayman found more convincing than any dramatics. "It's come," Van said. "There's an interstellar ship out there with 1,000-odd crew that would give Darley himself nightmares." Wayman had to shake him forcibly before he could continue. "They're sorry they can't put down and help us," Van said. "Galactic regulations, it seems. But they feel they should warn us that they've let some sort of bloodthirsty jungle monster, a specimen they were freighting to an interplanetary zoo, escape in a lifeboat. It's loose down here." "Dutchman's Cay," Wayman breathed. "What kind of brute could live through a blast like that?" "It left the lifeboat before the power plant blew," Van said. "They're tracking its aura now. It's intelligent, to a degree, about on par with ourselves, I gather. And it's big. It's the largest and most vicious life form they've met in kilo-years of star trading." He frowned over a concept unsuited to words. "Longer than thousands. Their culture goes back so far that the term doesn't register." "Ellis," Wayman said, "tell him to sheer off. Tell him to keep away from that island." Van clapped on the telethink helmet and felt real panic when he found the net vacant, except for a near-hysterical Washington operator. "Aliens are off the air," he said, "but I can't feel Ellis." "Maybe he isn't wearing his telethink. I'll try his launch radio." He had the microphone in his hand when Van said, "They got the message in Washington, and they're petrified. I asked for a copter to pick up Ellis, and the Hermit if they can reach them before this thing does. But they're thinking along different lines. They're sending a squadron of jet bombers with non-atomic HE to make sure the beast doesn't escape to the mainland and devastate the countryside." Wayman said incredulously, "They'll blow the Cay to bits. What about Ellis and the Hermit?" "Ellis is to evacuate him, if possible. They're giving us 20 minutes before the jets come. After that—" He didn't have to finish. At midnight, old Charlie Trask was wading knee-deep in the east side grass flats of his private lagoon, methodically netting shrimp that darted to the ooze-clouded area stirred up by his ragged wading shoes. An empty gunny sack hung across one shoulder, ready for the coon oysters he would pick from mangrove roots on his way back to his shack. In his dour and antisocial way, Charlie was content. He had nearly enough shrimp for boiling and for bait, with the prospect of coon oyster stew in the offing. He had tobacco for his pipe, and cartridges for his single-shot 22 caliber rifle, and a batch of potent homebrew ready for the bottling. What more could a man want? The blast and glare of the Moritz landing on the western fringe of his cay jarred Charlie from his mellow mood like a clear-sky thunderbolt. The concussion rattled what teeth remained to him, and brought a distant squall from his cat, a scarred and cynical old Tom named Max, at the shack. "Damn rockets," was Charlie's instant thought. "Fool around till they blow us all to hell." The rosy phosphorescent drifting up from the mangroves a quarter of a mile away coloured his resentment with alarm. A blast like that could start a fire, burn across the quay, and gut his shack. Grumbling at the interruption of his midnight foray, Charlie crimped the lid tight on his shrimp bucket and stalked back along the lagoon toward his shack. The coon oysters would have to wait. 5 minutes later, he reached his personal castle, perched on precarious piling in a gap hewn from the mangroves. The moon made it, to Charlie, a thing of black and silver beauty, with Max's yellow eyes gleaming from the porch floor like wicked, welcoming beacons. Still muttering, Charlie waded out of the shallow water ooze and stumped in squishing shoes up the ladder to his shack. The shrimp bucket he hung on a wall peg out of Max's calculating reach. He found his pipe in the kitchen and loaded and lighted it, deliberately, because the capacity for haste was not in him. His home-brew crock bubbled seductively, and it took time out to raise the grimy toweling that covered it and sniff appreciatively. "Ready to cap by the time I come back and get the shrimp graded," he told Max. He changed his dripping brogans for a pair of snake-proof boots and took down his .22 caliber rifle from its pegs, not because he really imagined that anyone might have lived through such a blast, but because strangers, them radio fellows 2 Ks east, for instance, might take it into their heads to come prying around. He was halfway across the quay when the drone of Ellis's launch entering his lagoon justified his suspicions. Charlie's investigation was soon over. A dying plume of steam rising from a circle of battered mangroves told him that no danger of fire impended, and he turned back in relief. It did not occur to him that the pilot of this hypothetical rocket might be lying desperately injured in the shallow water, at the mercy of sharks and crocodiles. If it had, he would not have moved to help. Any fool who got himself into such a spot, in Charlie's rude philosophy, could get himself out. The drone of the launch's engine was loud when he reached his shack. The boat, handled by a pilot grotesque in what Charlie took at first for a diver's helmet, was heading directly for his landing at an unsafe speed. "Serve him right if he shoals on an oyster bed and rips his bottom," Charlie said. As if on cue, the boat swerved sharply. Its pilot came half erect, arms flung wide in a convulsive gesture. The engine roared wildly. The boat heeled, slamming its occupant against the right gunwale, and blasted straight for Charlie's shack. Miraculously, it missed the shack's piling and lunged half its length upon the sand. The engine roar died instantly. The pilot was thrown headlong overside, Goldberg helmet flying off in mid-arc, to lie stunned at the foot of Charlie's ladder. Callously, Charlie stepped over Ellis's twitching form and stumped up the ladder to his shack. Max, who had taken to the porch rafters at the crash of the launch, came meowing gingerly down to meet him. "It's all right," Charlie told him. "Just some fool that don't know how to handle a boat." He leaned his rifle against the wall and brought a split bamboo chair from the kitchen. He was not too late. The bucket, when he took it from its peg, still slithered satisfactorily with live shrimp. The squawking of the launch radio roused Ellis. He groaned and sat up, dazed and disoriented by the combined shock of Zaxtel's telepathic bombshell and his own rude landing, just as Wayman gave up his attempt at radio contact. In the silence that fell, Ellis would have fainted again, except for the chilling knowledge that he was unarmed and afoot on the same quay with a man-eating alien monster that might make its appearance at any moment. He collected wits and breath to stave off the black pall of shock that still threatened. "Come down from there and help me push the launch off," he called up to Charlie Trask. "We've got to get off this quay, Fast!" Charlie separated a menu-sized shrimp from his bucket. "You grounded her," he said sourly. "Push her off yourself." "Listen," Ellis said desperately. "That blast was a ship from space, from another star. A wild animal escaped from it, something worse than you ever dreamed of. We've got to get out of here before it finds us." Charlie grunted and chose another shrimp. The Morid, as Zaxtel had pictured it, rose vividly in Ellis's memory, fanged and shaggy and insatiably voracious, a magenta-furred ursine embodiment of bloodlust made the worst by its near-human intelligence. He described it in dogged haste, his eyes frozen to the tangle of inland underbrush behind the shack. "No such varmint in these Ks," old Charlie said. The launch radio blared again in Wayman's voice, speaking urgently of jet bombers and deadlines. A glance at his watch brought Ellis up from the sand in galvanic resolution. "In 12 minutes, he said grimly, "a squadron of planes will pinpoint this K and blast it out of the water. I'm not going to be eaten alive or blown to bits arguing with you. If I can't push the launch off alone, I'll swim." He scooped up his fallen telethink helmet and ran for the launch. At the 4th step, his foot caught in the iron-hard stump of a mangrove root that had been chopped off inches above the sand, and he fell heavily. Pain blinded him. His right ankle lanced with fire and went numb. He fought to rise, and fell again when the ankle collapsed under him. "Hell," he said, just before blackness claimed him for the second time. "I've broken my leg." His 12 minutes had dwindled to 7 when Ellis roused. He tried to stand, his twisted ankle momentarily forgotten, and gave it up when the mangroves spun dizzily before his eyes. He couldn't afford to pass out again. He made one last-ditch bid for help. "My leg's broken," he yelled up to old Charlie Trask. "Get down here and lend a hand." Charlie glowered and said nothing. Max bounded down the ladder, tail stiffly erect and scarred ears cocked at the underbrush in baleful curiosity. "The thing is coming this way," Ellis called. "Your cat scents it. Will you let us all be killed?" Charlie Trask graded another shrimp. Swearing bitterly, Ellis caught up his telethink helmet and slid it over his head. He found the net in a welter of confusion. Washington demanded further information. Van at the station was calling him frantically. His own scramble for help images only added to the mental babble. On the Federation ship, confusion was nearly as rampant. Zaxtel's dilemma still held. He could not make planetfall. Time was too short for aid now, in any case. But neither could he, with clear galactic conscience, desert the harried primitives below while hope remained. Ellis's predicament forced Zaxtel to a decision. He could only follow the Morid's aura and relay its progress. It could not be helped that the relayed image was blurred out of definition and weirdly askew. The Morid's visual and auditory range differed so sharply from either human or galactic that even over the ship's wonderfully selective telecommunicator, little of the Morid's immediate surroundings came through clearly. Its aura arrived with a burning intensity that turned Zaxtel and his group faint with empathetic horror. But the fact that the Morid had just made its first kill obliterated all detail for the moment beyond a shocking welter of blood and torn flesh. Ellis fared a little better under the second telepathic blast than under the first. He managed to snatch off his telethink helmet just in time. "The thing just killed something out there," he yelled at Charlie Trask. "It's coming this way. Are you going to sit there and—" Charlie graded his last edible shrimp, took up his bucket and went inside. The leisurely clinking of homebrew bottles drifted after him, clear and musical on the still hot air. Ellis looked at his watch and considered prayer. He had 3 minutes left. When the morid came, Ellis was sitting dumbly on the sand, nursing his broken ankle and considering with a shock-detached part of his mind a fragmentary line of some long-forgotten school-days poem. What rough beast is this? The rest eluded him. The underbrush beyond the shack rustled, and the morid's ravening image sprang to Ellis's mind with a clarity that shook his 3 net participants to the core, one of them past endurance. Van, in the station, said, "Dear God!" and braced himself for the end. In Washington, the operator fainted and had to be dragged from his console. Aboard the Federation ship, Zaxtel radiated a shaken "Enough!" and tentacled a stud that sent his craft flashing on its way through subspace. At Charlie Trask's shack, Max bounded across the clearing and into the brush. There followed a riot of squalling and screaming that brought Charlie out of his shack on the run. Ellis sat numbly, beyond shock, waiting for the worst. Unaccountably, the worst was delayed. Charlie came back, clutching a protesting Max by the scruff of the neck, and threw down something at Ellis's feet. Something small and limp and magenta-furred, smeared with greenish blood and very, very dead. "There's your varmint," said Charlie. With 1 minute remaining before the promised bombers roared over, Ellis, with the frozen clarity he had not dreamed he possessed, radiated a final message before he fainted again. "Call off the jets," he said, in effect. "It's over. The beast is dead. The hermit's cat killed it." An hour later at the station, his ankle bandaged and his 3rd cup of coffee in hand, Ellis could review it all with some coherence. "We didn't consider the business of relative size," he said. "Neither did our galactic friends. Apparently they're small, and so are all the species they've met with before. Maybe we're something unique in the universe, after all. And maybe it's a good thing they didn't land and learn how unique." "It figures," Wayman said. "Washington let it out on the air that DF Stations made a fix on the spaceship before it jumped off. It measured only 22 feet. Van said wonderingly, "And there were hundreds of them aboard. Gentlemen, we are Brobdingnagians in a universe of Lilliputians." "I've been trying," Ellis said irrelevantly, "to recall a poem I read once in school. I've forgotten the author and all the verse but one line. It goes, 'What rough beast is this?'" Van quoted. "You were thinking about it hard enough when the debacle in the brush took place. The image you radiated was rough enough. It shocked the pants off us." "And off the Galactics," Wayman said. "The shoe is on the other foot now, I think." He went to the Quonset door and looked out and up, listening. "Jets. The Washington brass on its way to cross-examine us." "The other foot?" Van said. "Don't be cryptic, man. Whose foot?" "Theirs," Ellis said. "Don't you see? One of these days we'll be going out there to make our own place in the galaxy. With our size and disposition, how do you think we'll seem to those gentle little people?" Van whistled in belated understanding. "Rough," he said. The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. Vital Ingredient by Charles V. DeVette. Originally published in If Worlds of Science Fiction, July 1952. Narrated by Tom Trussel. "Now watch," Rem said, indicating the native. Macca had been absent, exploring the countryside in the immediate vicinity of their landing place, and had not witnessed the capture of the native or the tests his two companions made on it. Macca followed Rem's gaze to where the biped native sat hunched. The creature was bent into an ungainly position, its body crooked at incongruous angles, in such a way as to allow most of its weight to rest on a packing box at the base of a middle angle. Its stubby feet, on the ends of thin pipe-like legs, rested against the floor of the spaceship. Its body was covered almost entirely with an artificial skin material of various colors. Some of the colors hurt Macca's eyes. In the few places where the flesh showed through, the skin was an unhealthy pallid white. Slowly, the creature's head swiveled on its short neck until it faced them. "Those orifices in the upper portion of its skull are evidently organs of sight," Rem said. "It sees that we are quite a distance away. It will probably attempt to escape again." Slowly, the native's head rotated away from them in a half-circle until it faced Tools, working over his instruments on the far side of the room. Then it turned its head back until it faced the door of the ship. "It is setting itself for flight now," Rem said. "Notice the evidence of strain on its face." The creature leaned forward, and the appendages on the ends of its upper limbs clutched the sides of the box as it propelled its body forward. It raised its right foot in a slow arc, employing a double-jointed braking action of its leg. For a long moment it rested its entire weight on its lumpy right foot, while its momentum carried its body sluggishly forward. Then it repeated the motion with its left leg, then again its right, all the while evidencing great exertion and concentration of effort. "It is making what it considers a mad dash for freedom," Rem said, "probably at the ultimate speed of which it is capable. That would be ridiculous, except that it is normal for its own environment. This is definitely a slow-motion world." The creature was a third way to the door now. Once again its head turned in its slow quarter circle to look at them. As it saw that Rem and Macca had not moved, it altered the expression on its face. "It seems to express its emotions through facial contortions," Rem said, "though I suspect that the sounds it makes with the upper part of its trachea during moments of agitation are also outlets of emotional stress rather than efforts at communication." He called across the room to Tools. "What did you find out about its speech?" "Extremely primitive," Tools replied. "Incredible as it may appear for us, it uses combinations of sounds to form word symbols. Each word indicates some action or object, or denotes degree, time, or shades of meaning. Other words are merely connectives. It seems to make little use of inflections, the basis of a rational language. Thoughts which we can project with a few sounds would take it dozens of words to express." "Just how intelligent is it?" Macca asked. "Only as intelligent as a high degree of self-preservation instinct would make it." "Are you certain that it is a member of the dominant species of life on the planet?" "There's no doubt about it," Tools replied. "I've made very careful observations." "This attempt at escape is a pretty good example of its intelligence," Rem said. "This is the 6th time it has tried to escape, in exactly the same way. As soon as it sees that we are farther away from it than it is from the door, it makes its dash." The creature was one step away from the spaceship's open portal now, and bringing its foot up to cross the threshold. Rem walked over and lifted it off the floor. "Its legs are still moving in a running motion," Macca said. "Doesn't it realize yet that you've picked it up?" "Its nervous systems and reflexes are evidently as slow as its motor muscles," Rem replied. There has not been time for the sensation of my picking it up to reach the brain, and for the brain to send back its message to the legs to stop their running motion." "How heavy is it?" Macker asked. "Only a few ounces," Rem replied. "But that's logical, considering that this is a light planet. If we took it back to our own heavy world, gravity would crush it to a light film of the liquid which comprises the greater part of its substance." Rem set the creature down on the box in its former queerly contorted position. Tools had left his instruments and strolled over beside them to observe the native. "One of its appendages seems bent at a peculiar angle," Macker said. "I noticed that," Rem answered. "I think that I may have broken the bone in several places when I first captured it. I was not aware then how fragile it was. But now that you mention it, I should be able to use that injury to give you a good illustration of the interplay of emotional expressions on its face. Observe now, as I touch it." Rem reached over and touched, very lightly, the broken portion of the native's appendage. The muscles of the creature's face pulled its flaccid flesh into distorted positions, bunching some and stretching others. "It is very probably registering pain," Rem said. Suddenly the starch seemed to leave the native's body, and it slowly slumped across the packing box. "Why is it doing that, Tools?" Rem asked. Tools concentrated for a minute, absorbing the feelings and thought pulsations emanating from the creature. "The conscious plane of its mind has blanked out," he said. "I presume the pain you caused by touching its wounded member resulted in a breakdown of its nervous system. The only thought waves I receive now are disjointed impressions and pictures following no rational series. However, I'm certain that it will be only temporary." "Don't you think that in justice to this creature we should repair its wound before we free it?" Macker asked. "I had intended to have it done," Rem replied. "You shouldn't have any trouble fixing it, should you, Tools?" "No," Tools answered. "I may as well attend to it right now." He rolled the portable converter over beside the creature and carefully laid its arm in the pan. The converter automatically sets its gauges and instruments of calculation and gave its click of ready. Tools fed a short length of basic into the machine, and it began its work. The native was still unconscious. The bone of the wounded arm slowly evaporated, beginning with the wrist joint. The evaporated portion was instantly replaced by the manufactured bone of the converter. At the same time, it repaired all ruptured blood vessels and damaged ligaments and muscles. "It was not possible, of course, for me to replace the bone with another of the same composition as its own," Tools said, after the machine had completed its work. "But I gave it one of our heavy ones. There will be no force on this planet powerful enough to break it again." The native's first evidence of a return to consciousness was a faint fluttering of the lids that covered its organs of vision. The lids opened, and it looked up at them. "Its eyesight is as slow as its muscular reactions," Rem said. "Watch." Rem raised his hand and waved it slowly in front of the native's face. The eyes of the native, moving in odd, jerking movements, followed the hand's progress. Rem raised the hand, speeding his action slightly, and the eyesight faltered and lost it. The native's eyes rolled wildly until once again they located the hand. Rem took 3 steps forward. The native's eyes were unable to follow his change of position. Its gaze wandered about the room until again it settled on Rem's waiting figure. "Can you imagine anything being so slow," Rem said, "and still?" Suddenly Macker interrupted. "Something is wrong. It's trying to get up, but it can't." The native was registering signs of distress, kicking its legs and twisting its body into new positions of contortion. "I see what the trouble is," Tools said. "It's unable to lift the appendage with a new bone in. I never thought of that before, but its light muscles aren't strong enough to lift the limb. We've got the poor creature pinned to the box by the weight of its own arm." "We can't do that to it," Rem said. "Isn't there any way you can give it a lighter bone?" "None that wouldn't take a retooling of the converter," Toole said. "I'm not certain that I could do it, and even if I could, we don't have the time to spare. I could give it stronger muscles in the arm, but that may throw off the metabolism of the whole body. If it did, the result would be fatal. I'd hate to chance it." "I have an idea," Macca said. By the inflections of his tones, the others knew that some incongruity of the situation had aroused Macca's sense of humour. "Why don't we give the creature an entirely new body? We could replace the flesh and viscera, as well as the cartilaginous structure, with our own type substance. It would probably be an indestructible being as far as its own world is concerned, and it should be as powerful as the mightiest machines. We'd leave behind us a Superman that could change the course of this world's history. You could do it, couldn't you, Tools?" "Quite simply. Our policy has always been not to interfere in any way with the races we study," Rem protested. "But our policy has also been never to harm any of them, if at all possible to avoid it," Macca insisted. "In common justice, you have to complete the job Tools began on the arm, or you're condemning this poor thing to death." "But do we have the right to lose such an unpredictable factor as it would be among them?" Rem asked. "After all, our purpose is exploration and observation, not playing the parts of gods to the primitives we encounter." "True, that is the rule which we have always followed in the past," Macca agreed. "But it is in no way a requirement. We are empowered to use our judgment in all circumstances, and in this particular instance I believe I can convince you that the course I suggest is the more just one." He turned to Tools. "Just what stage of cultural development would you say this creature's race has attained?" "It still retains more of an animal-like adaptation to its surrounding than an intellectual one," Tools replied. "Its civilization is divided into various sized units of cooperation, which it calls governments. Each unit vies with the others for a greater share of its world's goods. That same rivalry is carried down to the individual within the unit. Each strives for acquisition against its neighbor. Further, they retain many of their tribal instincts, such as gregariousness, emotional rather than intellectual propagation, and worship of the mightiest fighter. This last, however, is manifested by reverence for individuals attaining position of authority, or acquiring large amounts of their medium of exchange, rather than by physical superiority." "That's what I mean," Macca said. "Our policy in the past has been to avoid tampering, only because of the fear of bringing harm. If we created a super being among them, to act as a controlling and harmonizing force, we'd hasten their development by thousands of years. We'd be granting them the greatest possible boon." "I don't know," Rem said, obviously swayed by Macca's logic. "I'm still hesitant about introducing a being into their midst whose thought processes would be so subtle and superior to their own. How do you feel about it, Tools?" "What would they have to lose?" Tools asked with his penchant for striking the core of an argument. "The right or wrong of such moral and philosophical considerations has always been a delicate thing to decide," Rem acquiesced reluctantly. "Go ahead, if you think it is the right thing to do." "All finished?" Macca asked. "That depends on how much you want me to do," Tools replied. "I've substituted our heavy substances for his entire body structure, including the brain, at the same time transferring his former memory and habit impressions. That was necessary if he is to be able to care for himself. Also, I brought his muscular reaction time up to our norm and speeded his reflexes." "Have you implanted any techniques which he did not possess before, Such as far-seeing or mental insight? Macker asked. No, Toole said. That is what I want your advice about. Just how much should I reveal about ourselves and our background? Or should he be left without any knowledge of us? Well, now that the others had deferred to Macker's arguments, he had lost much of his certainty. Perhaps we should at least let him know who we are and what we have done. That would save him much alarm and perplexity when it comes time to reorient himself. On the other hand, perhaps we should go even farther and implant the knowledge of some of our sciences. Then he could do a better job of advancing his people. But maybe I'm wrong. What do you think about it, Rem? My personal opinion, Rem said, is that we can't give him much of our science, because it would be like giving a baby a high explosive to play with. His race is much too primitive to handle it wisely. Either he, or someone to whom he imparts what we teach him, would be certain to bring catastrophe to his world, and if we let him learn less, but still remember his contact with us, in time his race would very likely come to regard us as gods. I would hesitate to drag in any metaphysical confusion to add to the uncertainties you are already engendering. My advice would be to wipe his mind of all memory of us. Let him explain his new-found invincibility to himself in his own way. Macker had no criticism to offer to this suggestion. Does he retain any of his immunity to this world's malignant germs? He asked. They are too impotent to represent any hazard to his present body mechanism, Tools replied. If and when he dies, it will not be from disease. He will be subject to the deterioration of old age, the same as we are, won't he? Macker asked. Of course, Tools said, but that's the only thing that will be able to bring him down. He cannot be harmed by any force this light world can produce. He is impervious to sickness, and he will live indefinitely. Indefinitely? As his world reckons time. Their normal lifespan is less than 100 years. Ours is over 5,000. He will probably live approximately twice that long, because he will be subjected to less stress and strain, living as he does on a world of lighter elements. Then we have truly made a Superman. Macker's tones inflected satisfaction. I wish we were returning this way in 1,000 years or so. I'd like to see the monumental changes he will effect. We may, at that, Rem said, or others of our people will. He will probably be a living legend by then. I'd like to hear what his race has to say about him. Do they have names with which to differentiate them individuals? Yes, Tools said. This one has a family designation of Polnow, and a member designation of Orville. It will be necessary for us to leave in exactly 10 minutes, Rem reminded them. Our next stopping place, the Red Star, will reach its nearest conjunction with this planet by the time we meet it out in space. Then we will have time to do nothing more for him before we go, Macker said. But as far as I can see, we've forgotten nothing, have we, Tools? Nothing, Tools answered. No, we forgot nothing. But Tools was wrong. They had forgotten one thing, a minor detail, relatively. On Tools' world, his race, in the course of its evolution, had adjusted itself for its own particular environment. Logically, the final result was that they evolved into beings best able to survive in that environment. As such, their food, heavy, highly concentrated food, was ideally suited to supply the needs of their heavy, tremendously avid organisms. Orville Polnow had no such food available. His body, no larger than before, had an earth mass of 180,000 pounds. 180,000 pounds, the weight of 1,200 average-sized men, of fiercely burning, intense virility. Even continuous eating, of his own world's food, could not supply the demands of that body. 24 hours after the aliens left, Polnar was dead of starvation. The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. Classified Object by John Victor Peterson. Originally published in Fantastic Universe, July 1954. Narrated by Tom Trussel. This, for the greater part, George Winthrop learned later. The harried controller observing the airport surveillance radar scope in the La Guardia Airport control tower that sultry night at first ignored the uncommonly bright blip creeping in from the scope's periphery. Blips 30 miles out are of little significance. There are too many other airports within the radius with their own traffic problems. This return was coming from northwest of Teterboro, New Jersey. Let Teterboro Tower worry about it. The weather was worsening, and the Air Route Traffic Control Center already had traffic stacked up and holding, traffic he could not ignore. But his tired eyes were repeatedly drawn to the fantastically registering blip as it traced some object's beeline path in from the northwest, progressively advancing across electronic range marks and maintaining a constant course toward the airport, as charted by the indicator's reference bearing mark. Over New Hackensack now, moving across the scope's overlay map toward the George Washington Bridge. The return's strength easily equaled that from a dirigible and far exceeded that from a commercial ship. The blip was too bright, the trail behind it too long, too remarkably persistent. Possibly the Air Force had some super globemaster that might account for the blip, but in that case a flight plan would have been filed on so huge a craft's trip into the metropolitan area. It was damnably puzzling. There was something inexorable about the steady, precise progress of the object which brought mounting, unaccountable alarm. He raised his head, his thin, tense face doubly shadowed by the amber light over the scope's filter and the radar tent's ultraviolet lighting. "Hey, Bill," he shouted. "I've either picked up something strictly unclassified or gone cockeyed." The chief controller crowded into the radar tent beside him. "Where? Oh, I'm calling Mitchell Field. This is for the Air Force." 1. It was warm that night, with a breathless, enervating warmth before a summer storm. Too warm, certainly, to sit below in an apartment in idle discussion, knowing that his brother and sister-in-law would have resented missing the TV shows which a modest purse made their sole entertainment. Earlier, George Winthrop had excused himself and gone to the apartment building's roof to watch the steady procession of planes coming in under the murky, threatening overcast over Jackson Heights. Planes which swept spectacularly low over Grand Central Parkway to the runway, their throttled engines coughing loudly in the closeness of the night. He leaned against the concrete and brick parapet, looking disinterestedly at the round red eyes of the airport's approach light lane, staring unblinkingly at the threatening sky toward Brooklyn. He was chokingly filled with thoughts of yesterday's work and of his planned tomorrow, impatient with the enforced vacation of today. His eyes wandered blindly toward the northern sky and cleared suddenly, focusing. Coming in over the airport at less than 400 feet altitude was an unilluminated cylinder, pointed at the nose, bulbous at the stern. It was descending almost imperceptibly, moving with unbelievable slowness for its apparent size and lack of airfoils. He knew at once that he beheld something the like of which no nation on earth had presumed to make, except as a mock-up on a picture lot. Spaceship, his mind registered. With mounting excitement, he saw the object slowly crossing through the beam of the ceiling light pointing up from the airport's administration building. It moved without visible means of propulsion. Was it moving silently? He couldn't be sure, for several planes were noisily warming for takeoff between it and his vantage point. He'd watched aircraft, V-2s, and various missiles too long to miss the significance of the object's glide angle. Unless it lifted under power, it would surely descend in the flushing area. He turned, raced across the roof, and descended quickly to the street, his heart beating like a bass drum. 10 minutes later, as he swung his car toward Grand Central Parkway, he felt time's urgency, the beating pulse that had measured out minutes that so often could have been the last minutes, when he'd perched upon high towers, removing the connecting plugs of fission bombs that had failed to detonate. Oh God, not this stomach-wrenching nervousness again. His eyes flicked momentarily to the dashboard's vacant panel, which had held the clock he'd smashed that day when time's pressure had grown too great. Forget it, he told himself almost frantically. You're over that. You're well again. He sped past the airport, curved under the bridge where Northern Boulevard's eastbound lane crosses the parkway, and found the heavy late evening traffic out of Manhattan stalled, blocking all 3 lanes ahead. It must have landed in Flushing Meadow Park. On impulse, he swung right and up around to Northern Boulevard, crossing over the parkway. He cut left through a half-moon turnaround, the wrong way, and swung deftly through the westbound traffic into the boat basin, and then back under the boulevard on the undulating road through the park. Passing under the towering elevated structure and the railroad overpass, he discovered with a strange mixture of exultation and apprehension that his deduction had been correct. The cylinder lay in smothering folds of darkness on the gently rising slope near the City of New York building. He stopped, leaving the car's motor running, its headlights on high beam. Quickly he took a Geiger counter from the glove compartment and, dismounting, approached the object. The counter failed to respond. There was not even heat radiation. To his cautious touch, the stern was neither warmer nor cooler than the night. He gazed fascinatedly at the object's expanse. 200 feet long, he guessed, increasing from its pointed bow to about a 30-foot diameter at its midpoint. The diameter was constant back to a point 30 feet forward of the stern, then became abruptly bulbous. It resembled a monstrous gourd, bearing what strange seeds? Undoubtedly, this silent, implacable thing came from far beyond man's ken, a misshapen nautilus fitted out to probe the void. Had it come deliberately, or had it blundered, a derelict, to Earth? The sultry night suddenly filled with sound. Awed and frightened motorists broke through the fence from Grand Central Parkway and streamed across the park until a voice cried out authoritatively, "Keep back! This is the army! This is a restricted area!" Other figures raced from within the park. Anti-aircraft crews, Winthrop thought. The man who had shouted the orders was coming toward him. "What are you doing here?" "It isn't just idle curiosity, Lieutenant," Winthrop said quickly. "I'm a physicist. Los Alamos and other places. I'm afraid I'm damnably curious when something unclassified drops into our ordered world." "I see. All right. Stick around. Maybe you can help us classify it." The lieutenant smiled and swung away. Winthrop stood there alone as the soldiers got rid of the other civilians and established guard posts. Then as prime movers urgently and noisily brought up ack-ack guns, searchlights, and engine generators. There was a bawling of commands, a tense, noisy excitement. Under the encircling searchlight's glare, guards walked short posts, submachine guns ready. The noise subsided. Everything was in readiness, and, Winthrop thought, God grant that everything would be enough. Suddenly lightning forked across the sky. With the crashing thunder came a teeming rain which drove Winthrop hastily back to his car. The radiator coolant was boiling murmurously amid the rain's driving tumult. Winthrop shut off the lights and engine, sat staring through the streaming windshield at the smooth, enigmatic surface of the cylinder on the slope. There was a sleep-provoking magic in the downpour's prolonged pattern. O ship of space, the rains of earth will wash your surface clean. 2. He awoke at dawn, stiff from the unnatural position of his sleep, momentarily confused as to his whereabouts. Then he caught sight of the cylinder, and memory came sweeping back. Had something come out of it? Descending from the car, he approached a group of men standing near the object. A short, heavy-set major general who appeared to be in command turned sharp, suspicious eyes toward him. "What are you doing here?" Winthrop introduced himself. The general's suspicion vanished, and he clasped the younger man's hand warmly. "I'm Bert Hill, Winthrop. I heard of your work from Benton Allen. He's a close personal friend." "Of mine, too," Winthrop nodded. "Haven't seen him since Nevada." "He's flying up from Los Alamos," Hill said. "Many of your colleagues are coming, everyone who might conceivably be useful." "Any sign of life?" Winthrop asked, gesturing toward the cylinder. "No. There's a port amidships and some small apertures forward, but it might as well be a coffin. Why don't you look it over? But perhaps you'd like to get comfortable and have breakfast first. We've set up a temporary mess kitchen in the city building." "Thanks, General Hill." "Call me Bert." When George Winthrop returned, he found that a sizable group of tired-looking civilians had joined the military. Most of them were men with whom he had been associated. Greetings were brief. Detailed personal reminiscences sternly contraindicated. They examined the cylinder. With a great deal of effort, an engineer succeeded in unfastening the port lugs. Signal Corps movie cameras whirred as the port opened, but nothing emerged. "Carry on, George," General Hill said. "You've priority." "Hadn't we better wait?" the others protested. "Who knows what an alien might consider trespass?" "We've got to risk it," the general said. "Perhaps they need our help. Perhaps they're ill or injured." Hill and Winthrop peered into the interior. Vacuum tubes shone dully through an indistinct maze of ductwork, circuitry, relay banks, and directly before them, facing the port. "It's a fission bomb!" Bert's nervousness was suddenly wild within Winthrop. He fought it. "Amazingly like ours!" He grasped the port tightly, fighting trembling unease with taut muscles. "I must look at it more closely," he went on. "It may not be fully armed, but I'd better disarm the detonating device if I can. If it's anything like ours, it wouldn't take much tinkering to set it off. There's probably enough explosive in the detonator alone to ruin the interior completely. We could be trapped inside and blown apart." He paused, then added courageously, "I'll need light to get the plugs out quickly." "That looks like a button switch," the general volunteered, reaching into the port. Winthrop slapped his hand away. "Don't be a fool. The slightest touch might detonate it." "Guess you're right," the general conceded, turning away. "Montemere, run an extension over here." Winthrop crawled into the ship, arose, and stared in bitter indecision. He remembered a blockhouse at Bikini, another at Frenchman's Flat, voices harsh on loudspeakers counting the seconds away to zero. He remembered armed bombs on ghastly towering frameworks of steel vibrating beneath his touch with the furious kiss of atomic death awaiting the slightest slipping of his fingers. "Get on with it." He did. The plugs were out. He was faint, drenched with perspiration. The general was peering intently through the port. "It's okay now, Bert." Cautiously, the general entered, then turned back with an abrupt gesture. "Montemur," he cried to the Signal Corps major, "the equipment in here is still energized. Take shots of everything. We mustn't chance accidentally disarranging a single circuit. We've perhaps acquired a means of conquering space. We mustn't ruin it through carelessness." Major Montemur joined them with a camera. "The electronics boys will love this," Winthrop said, pointing sternward. Catwalks crisscrossed the complicated cluster of machinery. Everything was amazingly accessible, the ductwork transparent. "Strange, George," the general mused. "The science that constructed this must closely parallel ours. Can't you see the similarities?" Winthrop nodded. "I think so. Not that I'm qualified to judge." Behind the bomb was a bulkhead shutting off the ship's forward portion, in the middle of which was a great round door. Set securely in the door was a complicated instrument. The symbols on the dials and controls were utterly alien. Among the dials was what was apparently a timing device with 28 subdivisions, a slowly sweeping hand. It was silent, but Winthrop heard whispering in his mind the pounding time of the spinning planet of some other sun, and the urgency and great import of time returned to torment him. He had fought it while working on the bomb, and now he fought it again. "Bert," he said, "this part of the ship wasn't designed for entrance during spaceflight. In a pressure suit, maybe, yes. Otherwise, we can only assume that the crew doesn't require an atmosphere. Life may have evolved quite differently elsewhere." "I don't believe it. I doubt that there's a thinking being of our equal anywhere that isn't human or humanoid. Take your own comments about the machinery. And what about the books?" "Books?" Winthrop followed the general's gaze. Protruding from beneath the bomb's afterbody was a thick, finely bound volume lying upon a thinner, very tattered one. Picking both books up with trepidation, he examined the larger volume first. Its hard covers were marked with alien characters similar to those on the bulkhead instrument. He skimmed the pages, finding sections of either printed language or mathematics, still others of detailed schematics and precise drawings. "The electronics engineers and linguists can work on this," he said. "Association of the schematics with the equipment and the equipment's physical measurements and functionings with the printing may allow us to crack both math and language." The other volume was more puzzling. "No cover," the general said. "Pages missing. Bert, it looks like a comic book." They thumbed through that second book, sickened by the abysmal thought that somewhere some alien artist had perverted an obviously great talent to please and amuse the immature. Their hasty perusal revealed an obviously imaginative tale of a pastoral world's invasion by the rapacious, plundering vanguard of a humanoid race with many-digitted, strangely jointed hands. "The psych boys can have this," Winthrop said, apprehensively searching the shadows about them. They looked at the bulkhead door, then simultaneously at each other. "Do you think there may be something alive in there?" the general asked. "Perhaps. It's pointless to try to open the door now, though. The occupants may be in suspended animation. It might be tricky to bring them out of it without harming them. We've thought of suspended animation as one solution to survival in the big jump once we've found a means of propulsion, plus suspended animation." "The propulsion's arrived, George. Maybe we'll find the other. We'll let the electronics men in here now. They should be able to shed some light on this equipment." As General Hill assembled the electronics men, Winthrop walked away. Associates addressed him curiously, but he merely nodded in absent-minded fashion. He was several yards from the ship when he suddenly became aware that someone was challenging him, the lieutenant he had met the night before. "Just walking," Winthrop explained. He saw a gnarled, forlorn apple tree just beyond the perimeter of the guard posts. Almost pleadingly, he said, "I'd like to go over there, if you don't mind." "Hell, I don't mind," the lieutenant said, "but don't go any farther." Winthrop still clutched the picture book. A warning? A chill swept him. Was the ship indeed a coffin for the corpses of the survivors of a pastoral race who had sought to escape, but whose knowledge of time and space had not been adequate? The lieutenant was surveying him quizzically. "Thanks," Winthrop said, and walked to the tree. He sat down and opened the book again. He thumbed through it repeatedly, the pictures creating a sickness in him. "Hello," a little girl's voice said. Winthrop looked up. 6? 7? He could only be sure that she was blonde and blue-eyed and had apparently come from the direction of the botanical gardens. She clutched roller skates in her arms. "Hello," Winthrop said. "Where are you going?" "To the skating rinks." "Oh, you can't. They're closed." Her face grew solemn. "But Mummy and Daddy said I could." She was about to cry. He felt a bachelor's inadequacy. "Where are they?" he asked. "Over in the bot. She struggled valiantly and then said, "The flower gardens." She eyed the book eagerly. "May I see the comics?" "Comics? Oh, the book." He handed it to her wordlessly, saw her eyes show immediately outright horror. He stared aghast as she threw it down and ran wildly away, her skates forgotten on the grass, her broken sobs and screams echoing back. He called after her uselessly. Stunned, he watched the little scurrying figure vanish along the broken road toward the botanical gardens, wishing that he could follow her and solace her, cursing himself for ever having thought of showing her the book. 3. Lunch was over, and General Hill had taken the floor. "Gentlemen, while we're awaiting the occupants' awakening, or until we decide we've waited long enough, we must learn all we can. If they awake and decide to leave, we'll at least have obtained specific knowledge of how one spaceship works. We've only a vague suspicion of how the propulsion mechanism operates, but fortunately we've found equipment very similar to ours, simpler in some respects, probably worked from transistors instead of to them. The electronics men may have a free hand, except for the bulkhead instrument. We'd better not tinker there until we're reasonably sure we know what we're doing. It may spell life or death to the crew. Some may prefer to study the books which we found," he added thoughtfully. "If so, speak up." "I would," Winthrop cut in. "I'd like Rabin and Norris to join me." "An electronics engineer should round out the group," General Hill said. "Okay, Lizio. Now, gentlemen, shall we go?" Rabin was a practicing psychologist with a strong background in semantics, linguistics, astronomy, and a half-dozen other curiously diversified sciences. Yet, as Winthrop looked at him again, there was doubt. Not as to Rabin's capability, but as to his dependability. Was it some sense of inward nervousness, something contained in himself which he could not tolerate in others? Rabin was studying the horribly graphic pictures as though each were a major work of art. Winthrop saw in the man's dark eyes something that had been in the little girl's eyes. He looked away. The other men he felt more sure of. Norris, a top physicist at White Sands, thoroughly familiar with man's attempts at spaceflight. Lizio, an electronics engineer with an alert, intelligent face, an excellent reputation. Reassured by their competence, he joined them as they bent over the larger volume. They found upon each drawing what certainly indicated a scale. Preceding the last persistently identical symbol was a tailless arrow pointing left. They quickly named the last symbol scale and the arrow equals. "I'll do some measuring," Lizio said, and left. Winthrop and Norris began listing the various symbols, noting their frequency of appearance and relative positions. An hour later, Lizio returned and began comparing his measurements with the symbols on the drawings. "They're definitely drawn to different scales," he said. "The symbols and measurements are not alike. That means different identifiable numbers. Lads, we can crack the math." They arrived at a unit, found that 196 units equaled slightly less than 1 meter, and from the precisely marked drawings managed to label the symbols from 1 to 14. The 15 symbol proved to be a 14, followed by a 1. They were interrupted then, as the book was taken to the Astoria Signal Center for photostatting. They talked, while General Hill telephonically cut red tape to have computers rushed to them. Suddenly Rabin cried, "I know the ship's point of origin!" He displayed the book's center spread, a beautiful skyscape from the plundered planet's surface. The stars and constellations seemed unfamiliar at first, but as Rabin remarked their luminosities and relative positions, Norris exclaimed, "Of course! Sirius!" Winthrop's troubled mind soared. Sirius! Over 2.5 parsecs, 8.5 light-years from the solar system. Small wonder the crew was in a big sleep. Knowledge of the ship's apparent point of origin kindled a deeper fire. The necessity to find out what they could while they could. Even if the ship's occupants proved friendly, they might just be firmly reticent. The computers came, and an intense Benton Allen and his associates, a young man who immediately buried his thin bespectacled nose in the math and bent his thin frame to the instruments. The ship swarmed with technicians. Engineers examined the gyros and swore without hesitation that they could be duplicated. Others studied the electronics computer tied into the bulkhead instrument and its related schematics, or huddled excitedly with astronomers and spatiologists. One by one, they tied the schematics and drawings to the instruments and equipment, at length realizing that nothing in the volume related to the ship forward of the bulkhead. They'd been talking it over. "If you were in a spaceship," Winthrop said, "you'd certainly keep on hand the mechanics of what keeps your living quarters livable. There'd be another book up forward." They left it at that. Winthrop realized that with men here to whom math was sustenance, the sought-after answers might well be attained more quickly if he did not try to help further. As he went out, his gaze swept Rabin. The man's face was still drawn and pale in silent, fascinated study of the picture book. The ship again. In the bright sunlight, Winthrop asked questions while study of the stern went on apace. The bow retained its mystery. The many electronic listening devices attached forward had not recorded 1 decibel of sound. In his mind, the thought raced again. Was there something lurking in the bow? Something the little girl and Rabin had sensed? Some unspeakable horror from the stars? He sought the general. "Bert, what about the bulkhead door?" he asked. "Are we going to open it?" "Not immediately," General Hill replied. "The occupants will, if alive, probably come out in their own way in time. If we try to break in prematurely, we may bring on their deaths." His face grew somber. "It's a problem. The ship drifted down as if with a dead man's hand at the helm. It didn't come at that speed from origin. Someone, or something, cut its speed when it hit our atmosphere. Had it come in fast, the hull would have heated, and the occupants would have been roasted alive. Let's not force the issue. If alive, they'll come out eventually. Meanwhile, we're learning." "But can we wait?" Winthrop thought. "Are we sensible in waiting?" 4. Night. Benton Allen beckoned Winthrop to his side. "You're familiar with Einstein's math, George. What do you think of this?" Winthrop studied the recorded results with mounting trepidation. Similar processes, the end result would probably be E equals mc squared. "Which explains the reactor and the fission bomb. We've cracked the math, George." Lizio came in at a half-run then, his eyes excited, proud with discovery. "Gentlemen," he said quickly, "we could duplicate everything electronic if the ship soared away this minute. I guess we all thought we'd come across a product of a vastly more intelligent race, but their science is not superior to ours, except in application. It found anti-gravity, for one thing." He nodded, then went on quickly. "Something, however, puzzles us. There's either a draftsman's error or a technician's error. One circuit leading forward should be connected to a junction box on the main power dynamo. Instead, it's connected to one of the gyro assemblies. Its function was undoubtedly intended to transmit a pulse to activate some mechanism forward, probably to arouse the crew. It probably acted on the anti-gravity apparatus instead, slowing the ship practically to a standstill and letting it drift in with the crew unawakened. The circuit's forward connections are in the bulkhead instrument, which is in part an autopilot computer. We found a punched tape, which we believe spelled Destination Earth, and would also have led to activation of the awakening apparatus. Alan can work on the related math. I've identified it with the schematics. Then perhaps we'll be convinced that we must correct the wiring and arouse the crew." General Hill snapped from the doorway. "Lizio, we can't be hasty. We must not only correlate everything you electronics men find and everything the computers reveal, but recheck our findings 10 times over. Incidentally, copies of the book and details of our findings have been flown to the Bureau of Standards. They're busy on it too. If the crew is dead, delay won't matter. If they've been in suspended animation across 8+ light years, delay shouldn't matter either, to them or to us. We can't try to be rescuers and wind up murderers by mistake." 3 hours later, Benton Allen came again from the computers. "It's undoubtedly anti-gravity," he announced. "I've done considerable work on magnetic lines of force and theoretical work on possible creation of force fields for use as meteor screens. This math weaves in and out of mine like a pulse across a synchroscope. I'd been incredibly close to anti-gravity myself. That one blasted equation. Amazing. Lizio's been working with others on the autopilot computer. They suspected it was oriented off the galactic hub, and the math verifies it. Dr. Englander from Palomar plotted courses to various star systems with a hub as reference point, and Lizio had the instrument punching tape from Englander's data. The unit not only plots courses to any star system in the galaxy, but apparently to any planet of any system. How could the memory bank have been developed? Have they better equipment for probing and photographing distant space? Have they known space travel for millennia and explored and catalogued the galaxy? Now, gentlemen, I hate to provoke a heated discussion, but the computers back me up. The amount of anti-gravitational energy produced should drive the ship at over 20 times light speed. "Wait, Al," Winthrop said. "Certainly Einstein's whole theory of—" "You wait," Alan said with tired exasperations. "This math doesn't parallel Einstein's as we first thought. The difference is I haven't determined. The computers have done that. They do in minutes what it would take years for me to compute. Perhaps you're faster." General Hill said sharply, "No arguments, please. Standards will double-check. All the computers won't err if these do. Let's assume these haven't erred. What does it mean, then?" "That the ship came from Sirius in about half an Earth year," Winthrop said. "That it may have departed after they realized from visually observing our first atomic blast that there must be life here, probably a haven for them." Englander laughed. So they fled the beasties. Don't take your comic so seriously, George. Are you sure it's a comic? Winthrop snapped back. Ask Rabin what he thinks. And Rabin screamed. Shocked, the memory of the little girl's hysteria strong in him, Winthrop spun towards Rabin and found the man's dark face suddenly vacuous. Rabin's hands were spread out, clutching the table's edge. His eyes were blank, blind. "Rabin!" Winthrop yelled. He slapped the man's face stingingly. The dark head rocked, but the expression did not change. A doctor administered a sedative and took Rabin away, silent, stumbling in a trance provoked, it seemed, by concentrated study of pictures too vividly drawn in some extrasolar abyss of depravity. Benton Allen returned to the computers. Winthrop followed. There was much in Winthrop's mind then that he had still to rationalize. At length he whispered, "Al," and it was urgent then. "There's more to the ship than we suspect. To the books, too. I'm not sure about Rabin. He may have been on the verge of a breakdown. The book may have simply contributed. I don't know. It's hard to be sure. I'm just getting over a breakdown myself. I studied the book, and I haven't had a decent moment's rest since the ship came. But I haven't cracked. Be that as it may, there's something wrong in all this, Al. Whatever you find from this point on, let me know about it first, please." Allen turned quickly from the computer, peering owlishly over its glasses. "Why, George?" He searched Winthrop's tense face. "A crazy hunch, Al. Just let me know." "I will," Allen promised. "But, damn it, man, stop giving me the creeps." 5. It was nearly midnight, but no one moved toward his cot. Most of those who had witnessed Rabin's collapse could not sleep. Winthrop himself felt he would never sleep again. General Hill came from the telephone. "Rabin's resting comfortably," he said. "His personal physician confirms Dr. Vigdeman's suspicion that he had been receiving psychiatric treatment. The casualty, then, is a normal one. It might have happened anywhere, any time. We can't attribute it to some baleful alien influence." "What about the little girl?" Winthrop was tempted to ask. Surely there was no imbalance there. "Now," the general said, dismissing the tragedy of Rabin from his mind, "let's sum up. We've progressed beautifully. We have anti-gravity here, and proof that the speed of light can be exceeded. Standards fully verifies Allen's findings. Tomorrow, those most eminently qualified should try to determine how the bulkhead door may be opened. The General Staff has just ordered that it must be opened within 48 hours. All precautions will of course be taken to obviate damage to the ship." "How about to us?" Winthrop asked sharply. The General ignored him. "Now, let's call it a day. You must all be as tired as I am." "Stick with me, Al," Winthrop whispered urgently. Aloud he said, "Dr. Allen and I would like to go over the data now. We believe we've found the key to the door and that—" The General laughed. "If you're that close, George, it can wait until morning." "I disagree," Winthrop cut in sharply. "Time may be of the essence. How do we know whether the occupants are of the pastoral race or the other race depicted in that ghastly comic book? If they are anti-gravity and fission bombs, what else may they have up forward?" "Let's not be pessimistic," General Hill said. "If they had come meaning harm, they'd have set their awakening apparatus properly. They'd not have erred if they'd come with evil intent. Let's not drag in a monstrous hint of invasion. If you wish to keep on, well and good. I'm for the cot. Good night, gentlemen." 6. "Why can't it wait, George?" Benton Allen asked tiredly. "You'd better let me ask the questions," Winthrop urged. "You said you understood that autopilot computer. Do you think we could send the ship back?" "Yes," Allen said. "The tape can be reversed. The computer would compensate for elapsed time and orbital factors." Will you help me?" Slowly Alan removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "That would be the height of stupidity. We've a workable spaceship here. If we send it back without awaiting the awakening of its occupants, we'd be acting like congenital idiots." "Put your glasses back on," Winthrop said irritably. His right forefinger stabbed at the schematics, drawings, translated math. "Add it up, Mr. Computer." For a long moment Alan stared in silence. Then, suddenly, realization blanched his face. "The trees for the forest," he murmured. "Let's go, George." The sentry halted them at the ship's port, but passed them quickly when they told him their mission was urgent. But as they entered the ship, they heard him calling for the officer of the day. Alan attacked the autopilot computer, inserting the reversed tape carefully. Winthrop, with utmost care, rearranged the wiring in accordance with the construction charts and replaced everything else as it had been on the ship's arrival. "Agreed?" Winthrop asked. "Agreed," said Benton Allen. They left the ship hurriedly, fastening the port securely behind them. A moment later, the triumph came. It was not a triumph to the general. In stunned horror and desperation, he watched the gleaming ship lift silently, slowly into the cool night air over Flashing Meadow Park, a monstrous silver gourd stippled with starbright. "What have you done, man?" he cried. "We sent it back, Bert," Winthrop said with a calmness he had not felt in years. "But why? Why? What in God's name shall I tell the General Staff?" "The simple truth," Winthrop told him. "We reviewed the data and reached an inescapable conclusion. But when it came, the disarranged circuitry cut into the anti-gravity mechanism and landed it safely, as we suspected. Had it been wired properly, something forward would have been awakened. I'm sure of that. The math explained the autopilot computer, the anti-gravity mechanism, the reactor, the fission bomb, and something sinister. The history book, not comic book, showed where the ship originated, and it also showed clearly who launched it. The math is based on 14 symbols. The invaders in the history book have 7-fingered hands, the pastoral folk 5. Steadily, Winthrop returned the general stare. "I shouldn't have said ship. It wasn't designed for passengers or crew. We thought the forward portion wasn't described. But it was, in the same equations that explained the reactor and the fission bomb. We use fission bombs to detonate fusion bombs. The missile's warhead contains a fusion bomb which the math proves would have caused a spontaneous carbon chain reaction which would almost instantaneously have wiped out the Earth. Through a technician's error, it came to Earth a dud. Its launchers will never know that. It will be back where it belongs 20 times quicker than the light now leaving Sohl, and it's no longer a dud." They all were silent then. "You licked it," Winthrop told himself, "when you armed the greatest bomb." Verification of classification came almost 9 years later. Then a flare-up of near-nova intensity was noted in Sirius, the finest photographs being obtained by Englander in New Palomar Observatory on Pluto. The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. Brknk's Bounty by Jerry Sohl. Originally published in Galaxy Science Fiction, January 1955. Narrated by Tom Trussel. I never thought I'd like circus life, but a year of it has changed me. It's in my blood now, and I suppose I'll never give it up, even if they'd let me. This job is better than anything I could get in the newspaper racket. I work all summer, it's true, but I get the winter off, though some of the offers for winter work are mighty tempting. Maybe if I hadn't been kicked off the paper, I'd be a city editor now, knocking my brains out. Who knows? But maybe I'd just be a rewrite man, or in the slot, writing heads, or copy reading. But the thought of newspaper work, after all this, appalls me. Turlick, the Sibylian, should be thanked for the whole thing, I suppose, though it would be a grudging thank you I'd give him, considering all the trouble he caused. Still, I first saw him on a July morning at the beginning of the vacation schedule, when 4 of us on the local side were trying to do 5 people's work. My first inkling anything was wrong came when I returned from the courthouse beat and stuck a sheet of paper in the typewriter to write the probate court notes. I struck the keys. They wouldn't go all the way down. I opened the cover plate, looked in to see what was wrong. I saw nothing, so I tried again. Oscar Phipps, the city editor, was giving me the eye. I figured maybe he was pulling a trick on me, but then I knew he hadn't. He wasn't the type. The backspace, tabular, margin release, shift, and shift lock worked perfectly, but the keys only went down a short way before they stopped. All except one key, the cap D. I hit the D. It worked fine the first time, but not the second. I tried all the keys again. This time only the I worked. Now I had DI. I went ahead testing. Pretty soon I had dimly. Then came a space. A few letters more, and it was dimly drowse the dreary droves. Phipps had one eyebrow raised. I lifted the cover plate again. Quickly. There I saw a fuzzy thing. It whisked out of sight. I snapped the plate down and held it down. The party I'd been on the night before hadn't been that good, and I had had at least 3 hours' sleep. I tried typing again. I got nothing until I started a new line. Then out came Primly Pride's The Privy Prose. I banged up the plate, saw a blur of something slinking down between the type bar levers again. Whatever it was, it managed to squeeze itself out of sight in a most amazing way. "Hey," I said, "I know you're down there. What's the big idea?" Fuzzy squeezed his head up from the levers. The head looked like that of a mouse, but it had teeth like a chipmunk and bright little black beads for eyes. They looked right at me. "You go right ahead," he said in a shrill voice. "This is going to be a great poem. Did you get all that alliteration there in those 2 lines? "Listen, will you get out of there? I've got work to do." "Yes, I think I've hit it at last. It was that 4-stress iambic that did it. It was iambic, wasn't it?" "Go away," I said miserably. Fuzzy pulled the rest of himself out of the bars and stood on hind feet. He crossed his forepaws in front of him, vibrated his long furry tail, and said defiantly, "No." "Look," I pleaded, "I'm not Don Marquis, and you're not Archie, and I have work to do. Now will you please get out of this typewriter?" His tiny ears swiveled upward. "Who's Don Marquis and Archie?" "Go to hell," I said. I slammed the cover down and looked up into the cold eyes of Oscar Phipps, who was standing next to my desk. "Who, may I ask," he said ominously, "do you think you're talking to?" "Take a look." I lifted the plate once again. Fuzzy was there on his back, his legs crossed, his tail twitching. "I don't see anything," Phipps said. "You mean you can't see Fuzzy here?" I pointed to him, the end of my finger an inch from his head. "Ouch!" I drew my hand away. "The little devil bit me." "You're fired, Mr. Weaver," Phipps said in a tired voice. Fired as of right now. I'll arrange for 2 weeks' severance pay, and my advice to you is to stay off the bottle or see a psychiatrist, or both. Not that it'll do you any good. You never amounted to anything, and you never will. I would have taken a swipe at Fuzzy, but he had slunk out of sight. During the 2 erratic years I had been on the newspaper, I had passed the city park every morning on my way to work, feeling an envy for those who had nothing better to do than sit on the benches and contemplate the nature of the universe. Now I took myself there, and sat, as I had seen others do, hoping to feel a kinship with these unfortunates. But all I did was feel alone, frustrated, and angry at Phipps. Maybe I had been too convivial. Maybe I had enjoyed nightlife too much. Maybe I hadn't given the paper my all. But I wasn't ready for the booby hatch, even if I had seen a fuzzy little thing that could talk. I drew a copy of Editor and Publisher from my pocket and was scanning the Help Wanted editorial columns when out of the corner of my eye I saw a blob of black moving along the walk. Turning handsprings, balancing himself precariously on the end of his vibrating tail, running and waving his forepaws to get my attention, was Fuzzy. I groaned. "Please go away." I covered my eyes so I wouldn't have to look at him. "Why?" he piped. "Because you're a hallucination." "I'm not a hallucination," he said indignantly. "I'm real flesh and blood, see?" He vibrated his tail so fast I could hardly see it. Then it stopped and stood straight out. "Lovely, isn't it?" "Look," I said, leaning far off the bench to speak to him. "I can prove you're a hallucination." "You can?" he quavered. "How?" "Because Phipps couldn't see you." "That's square. Ha! He would not have believed it if he had seen me." "You mean you?" He disappeared and reappeared like a flashing neon sign. "There," he said triumphantly. "Why didn't you let him see you then?" I asked, a little angry, but pleased nonetheless with his opinion of Phipps. "Because you didn't, you cost me my job." He waved a forepaw deprecatingly. "You didn't want to stay on that hick sheet anyway." "It was a job." "Now you've got a better one." "Who's kidding whom?" "Together we'll write real literature." "I don't know anything about literature. My job is writing the news." "You'll be famous, with my help, of course." "Not with that dimly drow stuff." "Oh, that. Where did you come from, Fuzzy?" "Do I ask you where you come from?" "Well, no." "And my name's not Fuzzy. It's Turlick, pronounced Turlick, and spelled Trlk. "My name's Larry Weaver, pronounced Larry." "I know. Look, you got a typewriter?" "Portable, at the apartment." "That will do. Aren't you taking things for granted? I haven't said yet whether I like the idea." "Do you have any choice?" I looked at him. A couple of ounces of harmless-looking fur that had already cost me my immediate future in the newspaper business. "I guess not," I said, hoping I could find a way to get rid of him if things didn't work out right. And so began a strange collaboration, with Turlick perched on my shoulder, dictating stories into my ear while I typed them. He had definite ideas about writing, and I let him have his way. After all, I didn't know anything about literature. Sometimes, when he'd get stuck, he'd get down and pace the living-room rug. Other times he'd massage his tail, which was as long as he, smoothing it with his tongue and meticulously arranging every hair on it. "It's lovely, don't you think?" he often asked. And I'd say, "If you spent as much time working on this story as you do admiring your tail, we'd get something done." "Sorry," he'd say, hopping on my shoulder again. "Where were we?" I'd read the last page, and we'd be off again. One day Turlik crawled on a shelf to watch me shave, whiffed the shaving lotion bottle, became excited, and demanded I put a drop of it in front of him. He lapped it up, sank blissfully back on his tail, and sighed. "Wonderful," he squeaked. "Simply wonderful," he hiccuped. I let him sleep it off, but was always careful with the lotion after that. Days stretched into weeks. My money was running low, and the apartment superintendent was pressing me for payment of the month's rent. I kept telling him I'd pay as soon as the first checks came in. But only rejection slips came. First one, then two, then half a dozen. "They don't even read them," Turlik wailed. "Of course they read them," I said. I showed him the sheets. They were wrinkled from handling. "The post office did that," he countered. I showed him coffee spots on one page, cigarette burns on another. "Well, maybe," he said, but I don't think anything would have convinced him. When the last story came back, Turlik was so depressed I felt sorrier for him than I did for myself. It was time. We had been working hard. I got out a bottle. I poured a little lotion for Turlik. The next afternoon we tackled the problem in earnest. We went to the library, got a book on writing, and took it home. After reading it from cover to cover, I said, "Turlik, I think I've found the trouble with your stories." "What is it?" "You don't write about things you know, things that happen to you, that you have observed." I showed him where it advised this in the book. His eyes brightened. We went right to work. This time the stories glowed, but so did my cheeks. The narratives all involved a man who lived in a hotel room. They recounted the seemingly endless love affairs with his female visitors. "Why, Turlik," I exclaimed, "how come you know about things like this?" He confessed he had lived with such a man, a freelance writer who never made the grade with his writing, but who had plenty of girlfriends who paid the freight. "He had a way with women," Turlik explained. "He certainly had," I said, reading again the last page he had dictated. "He finally married an older woman with money. Then he gave up trying to write." "I don't blame him," I said wistfully. "I had to find another writer. This time I decided to try a newspaper. That's where I ran into you." "Don't remind me." Things got better after that. We began to get a few checks from magazines. They were small checks, but they paid a few bills. The big blow fell, however, when Mr. Aldenrood, the superintendent, came roaring upstairs one day, clutching a sheaf of papers. "This stuff," he screamed, waving the sheets before me. "The kids found it in the waste paper. They're selling them a dime a sheet around the neighborhood." "They're worth more than that," I said, regretting that Turlik and I hadn't burned our rough drafts. "You're going to move," Mr. Aldenrood said, "at the earliest possible instant." His face was apoplectic. "I'm giving you notice right now. 30 days. He turned and went out, muttering, "The idea of anybody committing to paper!" and slammed the door. 2 days later, I was seated at the typewriter, smoking a cigarette and waiting for Turlik as he paced back and forth on the rug, tiny paws clasped behind his back, talking to himself and working out a story angle at the same time, when suddenly there appeared on the carpet next to him a whole host of creatures just like him. I nearly gulped down my cigarette. Turlik let out a high-pitched screech of joy and ran over to them. They wound their long tails around each other, clasped and unclasped them, twined them together. It seemed a sort of greeting. Meanwhile, they kept up a jabber that sounded like a 33 1/3 RPM record being played at 78 RPM. Finally, the biggest one detached himself from the group and gave Turlik a tongue-lashing that would have done justice to a Phipps. Turlik hung his head. Every time he tried to say something, the big one would start in again. At length the leader turned to me. "My name is Brknk, pronounced Brknk and spelled Brknk. "And I'm Larry Weaver," I said, hoping they weren't relatives who were going to stay. "That's pronounced Larry." "I know. We're from Sibylla 3. Tourists. We include Earth in our itinerary. It has some of the quaintest customs of all the inhabited planets we visit. We're terribly sorry for all the inconveniences your wayward Turlik here has caused you." "It was nothing," I said with a lightness I didn't feel. "Turlik has threatened to run off many times. He has a craze for self-expression, and your literature fascinates him. He had an insatiable thirst." "I know." He turned to Turlik. "It's against the rules of the galactic tours to make yourself visible to any of the inhabitants along the way. You know that. And it's a prime offense to interfere with their lives. Do you realize how many rules you have broken? How long we have been looking for you?" "He did the best he could," I said hopefully. "As a matter of fact, we were having considerable success with a literary project." "I understand you lost your job because of him. Is that right?" "Yes, but I encouraged him." I hoped there was some way I could ease the sentence. "Turlik has committed grievous wrongs, Mr. Weaver. We must make it up to you." "Oh?" Here was an angle I hadn't expected. "What can we do for you?" I considered a moment. "You mean a wish or something?" Brknk laughed. "Nothing like that. We're not magicians." "Well, I could stand a little cash." "I'm sorry," he said, and did look pained. "We can't interfere in business. We don't have any of your currency, and we are forbidden to duplicate or steal it." He frowned and studied me. Suddenly his face brightened. He bawled orders, and several smaller civilians rushed forward and started scampering all over me. One of them nipped a piece of flesh out of my arm. "Ouch!" I yelped, rubbing the spot. "What are you doing?" "You humans are a proud race," Brknk explained. "I'll give you reason to be prouder than the rest. We'll change your metabolism, your endocrine balance, toughen your muscle fibers 1,000-fold. We'll make you the strongest man on Earth." "Look," I said, "I don't want to be the strongest man on Earth." "Well, how about the world's champion boxer? We can speed up your reflexes at least 10 times. I shook my head. "I don't want that either. Sounds too much like work. Besides, I never liked getting into fights." Brknk scowled, called a huddle. They buzzed at each other, their tails vibrating like mad. One of them finally yipped, and everybody spun around. Brknk beamed. "We've got it." "What is it?" A little civilian I hadn't noticed jabbed something in my arm. I winced, and he nearly fell off. He retreated with injured pride. "Come along, Turlik," Brknk said. "What's supposed to happen?" I asked. "It will be a glorious surprise," Brknk assured me. "You'll never regret it. The only thing I ask is that you never tell anyone about us." I promised. Turlik looked up at me. I noticed the beginning of tears in his eyes. I reached down and patted him gently on the head. "So long, little fellow," I said. "It's been fun." "Goodbye," he said sorrowfully. They vanished. Nothing happened for several days, so I bought a copy of Editor and Publisher and was writing for my first job when I felt a tender spot on my tailbone. When I examined it, I saw a protuberance there. There was no denying it. The civilians had given me what they treasured most. I was growing a tail. A long, hairy tail. As I say, I have come to like circus life. At first I tried to get doctors to cut it off, but they were too curious for that. Then I thought of jumping in the river or putting a bullet through my head. But after I saw what the scientists were making of it, when I viewed my picture in all the papers, and when I saw the awe with which I was regarded by everyone, I changed my mind. Now I make a cool 25,000 a year without lifting a finger. Just my tail. I've become rather fond of it. I've even learned how to vibrate it. But I've never told anyone about the Sibylians. They wouldn't believe it. Not old Phipps, anyway. Some day I'll go and vibrate my tail right in his face. I'll never amount to anything, eh? Let's see him grow a tail.
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. If you like this sort of human-read narration, please consider becoming a member of the channel. Members not only get rid of some of their unwanted money, but also may access the stories a whole week before everyone else. And that's it, really. Oh yes, the stories are and will remain AI-free. And free of charge, of course.